good afternoon or evening, depending on what part of the US you're on. I know that I'm based out of New York City, so it is very much almost dinner time for me. But I'm super thrilled to be here today for our first Mind Out Loud workshop of the 2025 year. As you know, Mind Out Loud is dedicated to creating safe spaces for youth, specifically middle-aged and high school-aged youth, to discuss mental health openly, share resources, and empower ourselves and each other to support well-being. Before we dive in, I just want to definitely acknowledge the, courage it takes to definitely prioritize conversations about mental health, especially during a busy school year. So as always, thank you for being here. Without further ado, I'll pass it off to Laher to give our intro for our hosts.
Okay, so today we have Marco here to discuss the intersection of civic engagement and mental health. So Marco graduated from the University of Minnesota magna cum laude with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science. As an undergrad, she led First Amendment reforms on campus and assisted in research on threats to civil liberties. She joins New Voters with half a decade of event management, outreach, and youth development experience. Previously, Margot worked on camp staff at Girl Scouts of Alaska and Girl Scouts of Montana and Wyoming, and at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Margot is based in Denver, Colorado, where she enjoys boxing, cooking, and creating her own board games. So, Margot, I'll let you take it away now.
Hi, thank you so much for having me tonight. This is really exciting to be a part of your first workshop of 2025 and to be able to share a little bit about what we do at New Voters with regards to youth civic engagement and voting. I also want to say thank you to all who have shown up here tonight, also on a school night. I think that is really amazing that you care, about your mental health, but you also care about the impact that you can have on your own communities. So to kind of start off, okay, so I was really hoping my slides were going to work, and they do, so that's good. So who are we? So you guys got introduced to me, and I work at New Voters full time, and I joined last election cycle. And New Voters is a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit. We were founded in 2017 by my boss when she was a junior in high school with the intention of registering every single eligible student at her Pennsylvania high school to register to vote. She was able to do that and then has since grown this organization to have multiple chapters across the United States and to have run over 400 voter registration drives. We're really proud of that, but the thing that we're most excited about is the fact that we work directly with high school students. There are not a lot of voter organizations that are centered upon the youth voice and concerns that affect Gen Z. And I'm really proud to be a part of one organization that does that, specifically because I know mental health is a really big concern and issue, and mental health resources are super important for people of our generation, and being able to empower the voter to then vote in mental health friendly policies is definitely something that we stand by, and we're excited that youth voting has opened up that capability. Yeah, so like I said, we have worked in over 400 high schools. We've had over 300 team members in the course of our 7-year history, I guess. And so many of those have been actually high school and college student interns that have been able to work with us and impact their communities for the times that they've been with us. We've registered over 80,000 students, and we've been in business, I guess you could say, for 7 years. So who am I? Lahar did a wonderful job introducing me, so I won't spend too much on this. But I did go to the University of Minnesota. I graduated in 2021 with a degree in political science. And then since then, I have worked solely at nonprofits that advocate for civil liberties and civil rights. And my work has been focused on youth. So whether that be college or high school students. I was thinking about it today. I'm pretty proud that my entire career has been, working with youth, and now working with youth voters, which can absolutely transform an American electorate if we choose to enact that voice. And then, my fun fact, I've attended 4 different Girl Scout camps, and then I worked at 2. So another thing, I love working with kids, and that's just more about me. So the problem. So youth are the lowest or the largest voting bloc, excuse me, but youth have the lowest turnout in elections. So I do want to preface this data by saying that the most recent data available for any sort of youth voter data is from 2022. Unfortunately, 2024 data has not been released yet or counted yet. It takes a while to make sure that those polls and those surveys are accurate. So when I talk about percentages, I'm either talking from the 2020 general election or the 2022 midterm elections in the United States. So youth are the largest voting bloc. 4 million new voters graduate high school every single year, which means, and 87% of those are eligible to register to vote. Why it's not 100? It's because not everyone's birthday aligns. So if you have like a July birthday, you might not be eligible to vote with your graduating class, if that makes sense. So that is a huge amount of people that are registered to vote every single year. And what's also sad though is that we're also the block with the lowest amount of turnout. So I was looking at some data today from the 2022 midterms, and in many states across the US, only 20 to 25% of eligible youth voters from 19 to 24 turned out to vote in the 2020 midterm election. I suspect when we see that data from 2024, it'll be a lot higher just because general interest is higher in presidential elections and presidential years. But that's really sad. And there's a lot of issues that will pop up every year, depending on where you live in the US, that could affect youth issues. And that to me is like more of a motivation that we should be voting in every single election that we have to make sure that the youth voices are represented. Yeah, kind of went over that. And then in 2020, only 40% of eligible youth voted in the presidential election. So that was, and so then you take that data from 2022, and that's 20-point decrease. So I would love to know if you guys have the capability to like answer in the chat, why do you think young people vote and civically engage at lower rates? If the chat function is working, which I don't know if it is.
It should be.
Okay,
One
cool.
I had was maybe like
Mhm.
people are like apathetic when it comes to voting. Like maybe they don't care about the outcomes, so they're like, why should I even vote?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that is particularly a big reason why people might not engage in midterm elections is they might think, well, it's just a midterm, like who my senator is really doesn't matter, or who my governor is isn't going to affect me that much. And we see a lot higher rates of involvement and interest in the presidential election, which makes sense. You know, that's a national election. It's very highly publicized. I'm sure you guys were so tired of seeing news about the presidential election by the time it actually happened. But I think that like if we're only focusing on the national sphere every 4 years, we're forgetting about, you know, laws and policies that could impact us locally that are voted on much more frequently than that. Anyone else have any other ideas about why you think young people vote and civically engage at lower rates? And there's not really like a wrong answer in case, you know, you're nervous about saying something and me being like, oh, that's wrong. There's not really a wrong answer to this because I think everyone has different lived experiences and why or why not they'll vote. Yeah. Okay, well, if anyone has any ideas, feel free to put them in the chat later and I will move on to the next slide. If I can. So one of the big things that we notice is that a lot of young people actually have difficulty registering. This is partially because every single state and sometimes every single county does elections differently. So for example, the advice that I would give to someone that lives in Texas is very different from the advice that I would give to someone that lives in Colorado. This makes it difficult, particularly for youth voters who are more than likely going to be moving out of state for college. They might have just gotten their first job. You know, when you're young and you're in that space and you might not be tied down, you might be traveling a lot. You might not know if you're eligible to register in the place where you're currently at. for example, where I'm at in Colorado, as soon as you register to vote, they send you a paper ballot automatically. So you don't even have to go to the polls. You can mail in your ballot. I think we're one of 2 states in the country that does completely mail-in voting, whereas Texas, the other example I just mentioned, does not do that. And actually, if you are someone who has changed your, this is a college example, if you are a resident of Texas, but you go to school in Arizona, this is a scenario that I encountered, you have to physically mail in a voter registration, updated registration letter that says your new address and that says that you're still a resident of Texas in order to vote in the state where you're a resident at. And that can make it really difficult and disenfranchise people, particularly young people and college students, from wanting to participate in the election. So that's something that we continually work on. If there's, updated policies to be able to, allow people to vote in, more ways than one. So as I've kind of been speaking about, young voters are underrepresented and underserved in our democracy. And as a result, this means that a lot of the issues that we care about are not prioritized at the ballot box. Things such as bodily autonomy, climate change, school affordability, gun safety, and of course, mental health. Those are issues that I feel like singularly have affected our generation more than others. And those are things that the youth more and more are voting on. When I talk to someone that's 60 or 70, to be honest, they're not really thinking about gun safety. They're not really thinking about climate change. Whereas, I talk to voters who are our age, who are in their young 20s or they're in high school, and they really care about these sorts of things because these things impact their lives daily. However, when we don't show up to the polls, those issues are not prioritized. So what are the consequences of young people not participating in politically? I kind of gave you an answer when I said that, if we're not showing up, then our issues are not showing up as well. But I'm really curious if you all had any thoughts.
Margot, just a quick thing. I just realized that the students don't have access to the chat for some reason because they're viewers. So let me figure that out. But in the meantime, see if you can use the Q&A function to put answers in there, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, that makes me feel a lot better. So I was like, oh, I hope these questions don't suck.
Right.
Let me find the. Well, I don't know where the Q&A section actually is, so that's on me.
I believe if you go to the shapes in the corner and then click Q&A.
Oh, wow. That's very exciting. Okay. Okay, I opened it. Okay. For those of you who are in the call, see if you can access the Q&A function by also clicking the shapes. And then, yeah, we'll see if that works. So I guess the question I have is, what are the consequences of young people not participating politically? Does anyone have any answers or ideas? Yeah, awesome. So not being taken as seriously by older voters. How many of you, and you can just click the little emojis, how many of you have had an experience where you've been talking to an adult or a teacher or an older person, and maybe you've been talking about mental health and they're just kind of like, oh, well, you'll grow out of it. Or oh, it's not that big of a deal. Or, oh, that's just a your generation thing. How many of you guys have felt dismissed when talking about those sorts of things by older people? Okay, I also don't know if you can click the emojis, so never mind. But I know that I personally have experienced that in my own mental health journey, and I know that can be really sad. It just makes you feel like your voices and your opinions don't matter until you've lived a certain amount of years. And of course, you're going to gain different experiences, and your viewpoints might change, and that's totally natural. but it doesn't mean that what you're feeling and what you're experiencing right now doesn't matter. And I think that that is really important. I think also that there is a lot of fear from older voters too. You know, every new generation has a different idea on how to do things, has grown up with different experiences. And so naturally, we might vote differently from people that are older than us. That's happened every time in history. And so, you know, an older voter might say a younger voter and might try to dismiss them and discourage them so that, you know, they don't end up voting at all. And I think that that's pretty sad. Okay. So what are the potential benefits when young people participate politically? If you're able to, you can click the little shapes down below on your screen and you can submit an answer to this in the Q&A. Yeah, absolutely. A greater student voice. I mean, think about how many more conversations we would have about student debt if more students were voting at the polls and more students, you know, wanted to, you know, go up to congressmen or, you know, advocate for themselves in that sort of way. Positive changes in leaderships and issues voted on. Absolutely. I think something that is sometimes disheartening for me is how many like really old people are in government. Not that I don't think that they should be there. I just wish that there were other people that represented more of my generation and more of the viewpoints that and the lived experiences that I have, that are, you know, maybe closer to my age than someone who's 80. Again, just different life experiences. And, you know, one of the ways that we can make our voice heard is by, you know, participating civically. So that includes voting, that includes running for office. You know, it can be something as small as school board to, you know, something like running for your state House of Representatives, something like that. It can be working on a campaign, you know, serving as a poll worker, things like that. There's many ways for people to get involved and many ways to share that youth voice. I'm loving these answers. Yeah, have better knowledge in who or what will have power and how that will affect us. Absolutely. Getting more younger people in office. Absolutely. You know, I've talked about this a bit already, but just the emphasis and the importance of mental health in our generation is really amazing. And I'm glad that there has been such a reduced stigma about mental health. But that isn't necessarily reflected in our politics or policies. You know, you still see politicians that dismiss mental health or mental health concerns or funding for mental health resources. And I really do feel like that could change if we had more young people voting and if we had more young people interested in civic engagement. So thank you guys for your answers. So benefits of political participation. We've definitely talked about this a little bit, and I loved getting to hear your voices. But impact on democracy, economic well-being of communities, academic outcomes of young people, and social and emotional well-being of young people. This is something else that I think goes overlooked, but you know, community is very necessary to us as humans. You know, we're naturally a species that thrives off of community. And when you're participating in civic engagement, you will see the benefits of social and emotional health too. You know, like feeling like you are a part of your community, you're voting in their best interests, you're involved, you're not just someone that's a bystander. And so I think when we think about like emotional impacts, that's definitely one of the things that you can do. So the solution. So this is what New Voters really prides itself on, is our solution to getting more youth engaged in politics and policies. So our vision is every high school student registers and pledges to vote before they graduate. So this will add 4 million students to the voter roll every single year. Just think about that, 4 million people. And, you know, so like if you take like an average high school experience of 4 years, multiply that by 4, in the course of your time at high school, 16 million new people are going to be able to register to vote. And that can have major impacts on state and local and federal elections. So one of the things that we really aim to do is to try to make sure that every high school student that is eligible to register when they're in high school does register. And the way that we do this is by hosting voter registration drives led by students. This is, like I said, a pretty unique model. A lot of voter organizations are focused on other different important blocks, and not a lot of organizations are focused on high school students at all, because there is a limited number of high school students that can participate in civic engagement and can participate in voting. But what we aim to do is identify top student leaders and invite them to run voter registration drives in their high schools. We provide them with state-specific toolkits. You know, a little bit ago, I talked about how there's different voter registration laws, and you know, just laws that impact voter registration in general, and they differ by state to state and sometimes county by county. So we provide individualized support for that, a free box of swag to do for your voter registration drive, group trainings, and an individualized mentor. So these are some students that ran a drive with us. And so the student-led drive process, you know, we work with students to recruit their own peers, whether they are, you know, political clubs or not, and we want them to reach students where they're at. You know, if you are in a government class and you're already having conversations about voting, those students might be more likely to be civically engaged. But, you know, if you're talking with a student in a math class and maybe social studies isn't their thing, they might not realize that they could vote in this upcoming election, or they might not understand why it's important. And it's so much better, I feel, to receive that information and care and concern from a friend or a peer than like an adult. Like even I'm talking to you all right now, like I'm sure what I'm saying would potentially matter way more if I was also in high school and I could relate to that experience still. So we work to educate and turn out student and voter registration and engagement year round. So actually one of the biggest times that we do voter registration is not during the election season in the fall, but during the spring, because so many more people are eligible to register to vote just because we've had so many more birthdays in the school year from the fall time. So, you know, our past drives that we ran in the 2024 election cycle were pretty limited because, you know, only about 30% of seniors were able to register to vote. And now we're super excited to continue to work with students to advocate for what they want to see and to register student votes when so many more are already 18. So if you're interested at all in, you know, contributing to your community by running a voter registration drive, I'd love to chat more about it. You know, essentially you plan your drive, you run your drive and evaluate your drive, and we're able to use that data to help other students across the country run more effective and efficient voter registration drives. So kind of like I spoke previously, our new voter support, we provide mentors, swag boxes, individualized support, and state-specific toolkits too. For those of you that are curious, go ahead and scan. You can scan this QR code and you can register to vote, confirm your registration status, or pledge to vote. Some of you might not be 18 yet, but you might live in a state where you're eligible to pre-register to vote at the age of 16 or 17. And that means when you turn 18, you're automatically going to be eligible to vote, in any election in your state. Additionally, you can, if you're younger than 16 and if your state doesn't offer voter registration, you can pledge to vote, which just means that this software that we use called TurboVote will send you a reminder every year, and it'll be like, hey, you have an upcoming election, you're eligible to vote in this, or hey, you have an upcoming election, you're not eligible to vote yet, but yes, you can pre-register. And that's a really great way to like relieve some mental anxiety and mental stress. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry about it. You'll just get a reminder already on your phone. And then if you're interested in running a drive and supporting your community via civic engagement, love to help you with that. You can scan this QR code too. I'll also send all of these links to Brianna at the end of the call so you guys can check them out if you're interested. And so thank you. So this is my email if you guys have any questions. But I kind of like want to pause for a little bit. I know that Mind Out Loud does so many important work in promoting safe conversations about mental health and reducing the stigma. And I would really love to know how you feel like your own mental health or your journey with mental health intersects with being a part of your community and civic engagement. That's kind of like a really broad question. So yeah, I'm curious if you all have any thoughts at all. I think I'll talk a little bit about like my own experience. Like I'm someone who stresses and, you know, has a lot of anxiety. I don't think that that's rare. But one of the ways that I feel like I kind of get a sense of relief is when I am able to vote or I am able to do something within my community, because I do feel like I'm making a difference. And that kind of helps calm my mind a little bit against all the worries that I have, particularly about climate change. Living in Colorado, we see the effects of climate change every single winter, depending upon the amount of snow. Right now, today it was 60 degrees, and tomorrow the high I think is 35 degrees, and then the high on Sunday or Saturday is, I'm double checking right now, is 18 degrees. So that is almost a 42-ish degree jump in less than 48 hours, which is really scary to me. That's uncommon. Oh, thank you for the emoji. Yeah. So like, and then this Sunday, it's going to be -11. So that scares me. Like, I have a lot of worries about that. And, I think I feel like, that definitely keeps me up at night. And I know I'm not alone in that, but there is something really empowering of feeling like I can participate and make my voice heard by voting, or, by, emailing my local representative, or, working at a nonprofit like this where I'm able to help other people vote and exercise their own right to do so. So again, I asked a really broad question on how you feel like your civic engagement and mental health intersects. That's how mine does, but I'm really curious to see if any of you guys have any thoughts on that. Well, does anyone have any questions that I could answer either about voting or civic engagement, or anything of that nature? You can just use the Q&A function too, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah, and I know that we had a few people just join a little bit ago, so you can just click the shapes in the corner of your screen, and that'll allow you to access the Q&A thing. What I feel is the best way to encourage younger people to vote, definitely not by fear tactics, which I realize I might have just done when talking about how scared I am about the weather, but that's not why you should vote, unless that motivates you. But I think that the best way to encourage young people to vote is to speak to them about issues that matter. I think a lot more people are motivated by speaking, like they're motivated to vote by issues that they care about, not necessarily politicians or a party. So for example, if I was talking to one of you all and you had brought up, your own concerns about mental health, or maybe your city board is thinking about slashing mental health funding or something like that, like I would want to talk to you about that and figure out if there's a way that A, you'd be able to vote in that election, or B, if there's something that you could support that would allow that issue to that would allow you to help and support your viewpoint on that issue, if that makes sense. So I guess to summarize, I always wanted to talk to people about issues that matter to them most, see if that's happening in an upcoming election or an upcoming school board meeting or something like that, and figure out ways for them to participate. Any other questions? What is my favorite part about my job? Definitely working with the high school and college students. As I said in the beginning, my entire career has been in youth development. I took a career break this past summer to work back at Girl Scout camp. I love working with high school and college students. I think it fills me with so much hope for the future when I get to meet students that are just excited about something and excited to contribute good to the world. And so I'm always very optimistic, especially with the high school students that I work with now that are running voter registration drives and talking to their own family and friends about voting. It's really powerful. Any other questions I could answer? That is a really deep question. What do you think is the best valuable life lesson or value you've gained from your experiences working with younger people in this field? I think the best value I gained is definitely the power of collaboration. Contrary to what I feel like is reported in the news, I feel like youth are actually really inclined to work together and inclined to work across differences more so than I think older people are. I feel like I hear all the time about how divisive America is, and I think there is truth to that, don't get me wrong. But I'm really surprised by the students that I meet because most students who work in this space have strong political beliefs themselves. And I'm always surprised and optimistic and hopeful when I find two students with two completely different political viewpoints voted differently in an election, and they're able to work together because they just believe so wholeheartedly in democracy and so wholeheartedly in advancing the youth vote and the fact that everyone should be able to vote. So I guess the valuable life lesson is my perspective has changed. I've become a lot more optimistic, and the value itself is the value of collaboration and being able to work with many different people. Good question. Any other questions I could answer?
I think I see one question in regards to what are some resources to stay engaged in civic efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. For like staying engaged in civic efforts, I would definitely recommend two websites. I would recommend vote411.org, I believe, and League of Women Voters. They're both nonpartisan resources that show you what's going to be on your ballot and provide you with different links so that you can see kind of like the pros and cons of each issue or something like that. I think that that's really important. Another thing is, and this might feel outdated, try and stay up to date with your local news. I get that that might be boring. I'm sure that many of you don't read the newspaper, and that's fine. I don't either. I get my news from the internet, but try and see what's going on in your local community, because oftentimes it's the school board issues, it's the zoning, it's the city council that are going to make decisions that impact you in your life. So if there's a way that you can, go on to your city's local newspaper website once a week and just kind of see what's going on, sometimes it can be kind of hard to digest that material. So I recommend, just doing once a week, just seeing what's out there. I think those are two good resources. And obviously I'll plug new voters. That's a great way to stay involved, is to run a voter registration drive. And then a great question I got: how do you protect your mental health while still advocating for youth voting? That is a great question. Something I, struggle with a lot. I think as I've gotten older, it's, I struggle with burnout or feeling as if I'm not doing enough. And the way that I do that is by setting up pretty strict boundaries. I'm not going to work in the evenings at night. I'm going to kind of protect my peace. I'm going to make sure that my phone isn't always on, to be honest. I don't need to get notifications. During working hours, of course, I'm on and I'm online, but setting those boundaries, I'm not going to reply to an email at 9 p.m. And, that's just me protecting my sleep and making sure that I am functional and, ready to work the next day. And I think also I try to be optimistic, and I try to focus on the wonderful students that I have worked with and will continue to work with. And that sense of optimism, I think, fills me with a lot of hope. Any other questions I can answer for you all? Doesn't look like it, but I want to say thank you for having me tonight, and thank you for providing me with the space where I can talk a little bit about some of the anxiety and the mental health struggles that I've had, and how that coalesce with my job right now. I hope you all will consider registering to vote and being a voter in any of the upcoming elections. There are a few states where there will be things on the ballot in 2025. Off the top of my head, I know that New Jersey is electing a new governor this year. I don't know if any of you guys live in New Jersey, but there will be things that you're going to be able to vote on in 2025, if not 2026. So I highly encourage you to look into voting compliance and laws in your state. And if you feel so compelled, feel free to shoot me an email. Maybe you're not ready to run a voter registration drive, or maybe you just kind of want to talk more about being a youth advocate and protecting your mental health. I'm always open to connecting and sharing any resources and any experience that I can.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Marco.
Of course.
Great. I feel like even as someone who's technically like not really considered a youth anymore, I guess,
Yeah.
there's definitely points that you could take away from this. Even when it comes to like not just like presidential elections, because that's the thing that, you know, when most people think of elections, that's like the big one that they typically, you know, show out. But even when it comes to, you know, like to the sort of smaller elections for like governors, mayors,
Yep.
you know, assemblywomen who also definitely have some type of leeway when it comes to policy. I feel like that definitely matters, and I appreciate you, you know, emphasizing that for our students.
Of course. Yeah, no, thank you. Well, thank you for again for inviting me and providing the space to do this. And again, my email's right there. Feel free to email anytime or check out new-voters.org.